The night the lighthouse went dark began like any other. Routine checks, the hiss of oil lamps, the lonely murmur of the Atlantic. But then, the light vanished. Imagine a tiny island lost to blackness, while ships still crossed those waters. In a moment, you'll see why mariners called that night a curse, and why 3 men simply disappeared off the charts. Stay with me. The first clue is a breakfast still on the table. Curious yet? Here's the catch. The scene investigators found made less sense with every answer. The Flannan Isles sat like a forgotten tooth in the ocean. Small, wind-cut, impossible to cultivate. Keepers lived in a cluster of stone cottages clinging to cliffs. One microstory. A supply boat once mistook a gull for a sail and nearly steered into sharp rock. Why mention this? Because isolation warps time, and small mistakes become tragedies. In a moment you'll see how geography turned routine into peril. Ask yourself, what happens to 3 men when communication is a ferry weeks apart? Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur. Names on a ledger, faces in a faded photograph. Short biographies, one was steady, one recently ill, one young and restless. Small details matter. A repair log with meticulous entries, a pocket watch stopped at an odd time. But here's the catch. The records trail off midweek with no farewell. In a moment you'll learn about their last routine check, and a tiny omission that opened a mystery. Who were these men, really? The paper reveals more than their names. Lighthouse duty was ritual. Polish brass. Wind the clockwork. Trim the wick. A misstep could mean disaster. Sailors depended on that reliable pulse. Compare it to a pilot's pre-flight checklist. Small, habitual actions that banish catastrophe. But on that week, something broke the rhythm. In a moment you'll see which routine cracked, and why it matters more than any single theory. Pattern interrupt. What would you do if your most trusted ritual failed in the middle of the night? The forecasts were brutal. Gale warnings, huge swells, sudden fog. The sea that had been a lullaby became a battering drum. Microstory. A supply launch tossed like a toy against reef and delayed by 2 days. Storms were not just wind, they erased sightlines and swallowed sound. But here's the catch. Even in such weather, the lamp was supposed to burn brighter. In a moment you'll see why the weather both explains and deepens the mystery. Could a storm actually make a lighthouse disappear? A few days after routine checks, the relief boat arrived, and something felt off. No signal. No welcoming lamp. The captain remembered a breakfast still warm, a chair turned over, and boots left by the threshold. Small things create big questions. In a moment you'll see how those domestic details contradict a straightforward explanation, like accidental drowning. Curiosity gap? Why leave mugs steaming if a storm had swept them away? The scene on arrival raised more alarms than answers. Inspectors climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room and found the lamp unlit. The mechanism stopped. But oil reservoirs half full. That detail is a razor. Fuel present, but light absent. Pattern interrupt. How do you stop a lighthouse without a power cut? Later log entries showed routine winding omitted. But why would 3 experienced men skip it? Stay for the last scene. You'll hear the most controversial theory. For now, focus on the mechanical oddity that doesn't fit the sea's violence. Investigators found porridge on the table, a teapot steaming, beds made as if expecting the men to return. These domestic clues are like timestamps frozen mid-action. Imagine a family suddenly walking out with dinner on the stove. Alarm bells. But here's the catch. Some items were arranged as if someone left in a hurry. Others suggested calm departure. In a moment you'll learn which small contradiction made official reports uneasy. Why do ordinary household details create extraordinary doubt? Captain Thomas showed an entry in his log. He heard no cries, saw no bodies, and noted the lamp dark. His handwriting trembled that day. Microstory. He had navigated those rocks for decades and described the silence as unnatural. But here's the catch. His report, careful and mundane, fueled rumors. In a moment you'll see how a competent mariner's calm observation became the seedbed for wild theories. What does a seasoned captain's quiet certainty tell us about what he saw? Authorities convened and declared an accidental loss at sea, a conclusion meant to settle the public. The report cited rough seas and risky ledges, plausible words that should close the book. But pattern interrupts. Official statements rarely match every piece of evidence. Here, the domestic clues and intact supplies strained that neat answer. In a moment you'll hear the one detail the inquiry almost ignored. Why would a document meant to reassure, instead, widen the mystery? Within days, speculation roared. Rogue waves, abduction, a drunken brawl, even fanciful curses. Newspapers loved the drama. A microstory. A fisherman swore he saw shadows moving along cliffs that night. But here's the catch. The most plausible theory, a freak wave, can't explain everything. In a moment you'll see a calculation that shows how unlikely some popular explanations are. Do we prefer a neat story or messy truth? The tension between desire and evidence drives the mystery onward. Scientists later pointed to rogue or sneaker waves, sudden walls of water that can wash sailors from cliffs. Example, documented cases where solid rock bathing pools claimed seasoned fishermen. But here's the catch. The men's boots were found neatly, not swept away, and their beds were made. In a moment you'll see the math of wave height versus shelter position, and why even a huge wave leaves telltale marks. Could nature's fury leave no trace? The evidence doesn't fully add up. Folklore filled the silence. Sea spirits, curses, and ghosts of sailors past. Locals whispered of lighthouses as liminal places where sea and sky argue. Pattern interrupt. Which is more comforting? A natural disaster or a supernatural villain? These stories tell us about fear as much as event. In a moment you'll hear one chilling local tale that echoed for decades. But here's the catch. Legends often grow from small, explainable anomalies and then take on lives of their own. Writers turned the disappearance into myth. Wilfred Wilson Gibson's poem Flannan Isle made the event literary. Foghorn images, eerie silence, and unanswered questions. Microstory. A seaman scribbled lines in a margin of a log, preferring metaphor to fact. But here's the catch. Poetic retellings cement public memory, often overshadowing sober records. In a moment you'll see how narrative shapes belief. Sometimes the version people remember is the one told best, not the one most true. Which story do you trust? Decades later, letters and personal items surfaced from descendants. A pocket watch, a signed photograph, a stitched handkerchief. Small artifacts humanized the missing men. They weren't just puzzle pieces, but fathers, husbands, neighbors. Pattern interrupt. A child's note tucked into a sailor's coat reframed public curiosity into family grief. In a moment you'll meet a descendant who still keeps a faded shirt. These belongings shift our view from sensational mystery to human loss. What does that change in us? Modern analysts reviewed the case with new eyes. Meteorology, oceanography, and preservation science. They ran simulations of waves and wind and mapped probable human movement. But here's the catch. Even advanced models returned multiple plausible scenarios, never a single definitive answer. In a moment you'll see the most persuasive simulation and why uncertainty stubbornly remains. Science narrows options but often leaves a last sliver of mystery. Isn't that where fascination lives? In the space between what we know and what we don't? Tiny inconsistencies keep the case alive. A ladder found lashed oddly, a logbook entry missing a line, a boot scuff on a parapet. These micro-evidence items are like fingerprints on a folded map. Pattern interrupts. Sometimes, the smallest mark changes the whole picture. In a moment you'll hear how one overlooked scratch could imply an attempted rescue rather than a sudden sweep to sea. Why do tiny things matter so much? Because in mysteries, scale is deceptive. The smallest detail can rewrite a story. Life continued on the mainland. Funerals, quiet committees, and a lighthouse that relit for other keepers. Communities adapted. Microstory. A boy who once visited the island grew up to study the sea and never stopped asking why. But here's the catch. Public attention dimmed even as private curiosity persisted. In a moment you'll see how memory behaves, fading in public but burning in personal narratives. What happens to curiosities when the headlines leave? Often they become family lore, and academic footnotes. Quick recap. A dark lamp, 3 vanished keepers, half-full supplies, and conflicting evidence. Domestic calm versus nautical danger. Key takeaway. The truth resists tidy closure. Evidence points in multiple directions. Curiosity gap. Some facts fit rogue waves, others suggest sudden departure or struggle. In a moment you'll hear the one detail that matters most to historians. It's not solving everything, but narrowing possibilities. Stay for the final scene. The closing thought will reframe the whole story for you. The night the lighthouse went dark resists a single answer, and maybe that's the point. History sometimes holds tight to its secrets. Forward reference. If you want the most haunting piece, revisit the captain's calm notes. They matter. Now a question for you. Which explanation feels truest? Nature, mischance, or something stranger? If this story gripped you, subscribe to follow further deep dives, and share which theory you believe in the comments. Stay curious and keep asking questions. The past rewards persistent attention.